because it's here. Tales of both hacking and climbing from Julien.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank everybody who's joining this call or this talk. Anybody who's participating in PancakesCon, appreciate it. Now, the previous talk was very, very technical, and I'm a bit like Tom. I'm not 100% sure of everything that he said, but this is going to be a lot less technical. We're going to go through the pen testing methodology. So basically all the steps that I do whenever I go onto a pen test engagement, just to make sure that the product that pops out at the end is more or less the same, so that there's no surprises or anything like that, and that we're following an actual process. So in that sense, hacking in my book is science and art at the same time. So there is room to be creative, but you still need to follow a certain process. Second part of my talk, I'm going to be talking about climbing. Sorry. Who am I? My name is Julien. As you can probably hear, I'm a French native speaker. I'm a pen tester. I'm a cybersecurity consultant. So my title changes depending on what project I'm working on. I'm co-leader of a OWASP chapter here locally in Atlantic Canada. Started that last year. I got a few certs under my name. As a cybersecurity consultant, certs are king just because it gets you contracts. People are looking for certain letters after your name whenever you respond to proposals. I'm an outdoor enthusiast, as you can imagine, because I'm going to talk about climbing. So of course I love being outdoor. I'm a volunteer ski patroller. I love adventure racing. And I'm also a husband, a father to 2 humans, 2 cats, and a dog. So I'm always tired, basically. So like I said, the agenda, we're going to go through the methodology that I use. I typically use the pen test standard methodology. I find that it fits really well with the way I think and the way I like to approach things. There are other methodologies out there. You don't have to follow this one, but it's the one that works for me. And then second part, we're just going to talk about climbing. First thing I'd like to talk about a little bit about hacking. We're all cybersecurity professionals here that are listening, most likely. We know that watching CSI and watching The Matrix, as we're hacking, we're not flying down tunnels of ones and zeros, right? It's not really how it's done. If you watch somebody who's sitting at a terminal and doing quote unquote hacking, penetration testing, it's not very exciting to watch. It's couple of screens, person's probably scratching his head. Depending on how you handle your emotions, you might be screaming or laughing, depending whether you were successful or not. And the other part of that spectrum is that while it's not all that exciting and it's not all that techy in the sense of, ones and zeros flying through the screen, finding somebody signed into Facebook and posting as them, that's not hacking either. It's just just playing jokes. So anyways, I thought that was a kind of a funny meme. So let's get through to the 7 phases of penetration testing as per the pen testing standard. I'm going to go through these one by one, and some I'll spend more time on, some I spend less time on, but this is a good overview of the steps that we're taking whenever we go on a pen test engagement. I'm not going to read off the slides here, but it gives you a good understanding. So let's just go to step 1, pre-engagement interactions. I like to joke around. This is the part that a malicious actor is never going to do, even though they're following more or less the same methodology that we do. A malicious hacker is not going to sit down with his client to discuss, the rules of engagements and who to contact if something goes wrong. It's just not going to happen. But us, as people that come in and we're getting paid to do an engagement, this is probably one of the most important parts, is setting client expectations. We want to, make them understand what they can expect from this engagement. A lot of times, depending on the client, I'll go in and they have no idea what a pen test is. They just know that they need to get one done. So it's really important for us to sit down, talk to them, talk about the goals, what they want to accomplish. Is this because of a regulatory body that wants them to have a pen test? Is this because one of their clients is asking to have one? And our approach might be different depending on why they need a pen test. One of the most important parts here is rules of engagement. What am I allowed to do and what am I not allowed to do? I mean, if you follow security news, you'll remember about a year and a half ago, there might be some people from that company that's listening to this talk right now. There were a couple of individuals that went past the rules of engagement, and they ended up in a situation where they got arrested and basically brought out to the local police department. Everything at the end turned out great, but just to show that if you don't follow the rules of engagements, there might be some serious consequences. So very important to take in mind. Once we've sat down with our client, and I'm going to sound like a broken record here as I go through these steps, I'm just going to reiterate them just to put you into context. So bear with me. So once we've sat down with our clients and we've gone through scoping, time estimation, what they expect of us and everything else, we can start in our actual pen test. And the first step that I typically do, and that's a good thing to do, is to gather intelligence. At this point, we're not even touching their systems. We're going online and we're looking for information about the company. Why are we doing this? Well, some companies, most people will hang a lot of really important information out in the open. This is what we call open source intelligence. What am I looking for? I might be looking for job postings. You might wonder, what does a job posting give me? Well, if they're looking for somebody with 10 years experience in Cisco gear, well, there's a really good chance that there's Cisco equipment in the environment. If they're looking for a senior PHP developer, there might be some really good indication that they have PHP in their environment, so that I can gather all that information and start painting a picture of what their infrastructure looks like. To be honest, most of the time when I go in to do a pen test, I know this already. Because in the essence of time, they'll give me some network diagrams, they'll give me some information on their infrastructure. But this is just to show in a pen test, just to show what somebody with no information whatsoever could find. Other things that you can think of, support forums. Here's a snippet of our configuration on our firewall and it's not working. Can you help us? Well, as a pen tester, if I have a little bit of their config file that's on their firewall, that's really good information for me. So once I've gathered that information, I'm going to do a little bit of threat modeling. This is not something that I spend a whole lot of time doing. I like to call it a mini risk assessment. Mostly, the way I use this is mostly to understand where I could focus my time. I'm going to identify the assets that's in play. So if they have health information that they're trying to protect, I'm going to spend most of my time, or I don't want to say most of my time, but I'm going to spend a good majority of my time focusing on getting to that information, simply because that's the information that an actual malicious hacker is going to try to get to. So I find that it's a good way of understanding where to focus your effort. Simply because as a pen tester and as somebody who's getting paid on contract, I only have a limited amount of time to do my tests. And a malicious actor might have a year to be attacking this environment. I really need to make the most out of the time that I'm given, whether it's time or money. So that's why we want to do a bit of threat modeling. So we've sat down with the client, we've gathered all the intelligence that we could online. One thing I didn't touch on is looking through breach databases. You might be able to find passwords hanging out in the open. That's good information. I mean, you can actually imagine why you would want to have a username and password when you're doing a pen test, but that's another thing that can be found there. Did a little bit of threat modeling, and now we're really getting into the meat of the engagement. We're actually attacking their systems. So the first step is we're going to check the doors. I like using analogies. In the vulnerability analysis stage, I'm actually testing doors. I'm looking for places where there might be a way in. So I'm going to check if the doors unlock. I'm going to check where the windows are and everything else. In a more technical sense, I'm looking at services, ports, software that's installed, things that are unpatched, things that are misconfigured, any type of technology that I can use to my advantage or misuse to my advantage to gain access to their systems. How do I do this? I can do this with automated tools, or I can do this manually. There's great tools out there such as, Nessus, Nexpose, OpenVAS, if you're looking at open source stuff, that's going to scan a network. It's going to be fingerprinting services and technologies. We're looking for names and version numbers. Once we have that in hand, we might go online, look at your CVSS database to see what kind of vulnerabilities it lies in, I don't know, Ticket Lord 1.2, their ticketing system, and see if there's anything of use there, any exploits that I could use. I'm not using those exploits yet. I'm just, again, painting a picture of where I could focus my attention to try to get into the systems. Common misconfigurations is important too, especially in an Active Directory environment where you could be completely patched, but if it's misconfigured, there might be ways in. So we're testing all of these things. Now, this can be active in the sense that I'm actually sending packets, I'm hitting systems and they're responding back, or it could be passive. I could be sitting in an environment somewhere and just sniffing the wire and seeing what kind of protocols are being passed around, what kind of things can I see passively so that I don't get caught. And that's an important point, getting caught. I'm talking about pen testing. I'm not talking about red teaming. Pen testing, you're not trying to be silent here. You're just trying to find flaws. You're trying to find vulnerabilities. You're not trying to evade intrusion detection systems. You're not trying to evade their web application firewall. You're actually trying to find if the web application has a flaw. So you're not trying to be silent here. This can be very, very loud. It would be a lot different in a red teaming environment where you're trying to be silent and you're trying not to get caught. This step would be very, very different. But you would still go through this step. Next up, we've sat down with the client, we've gathered intelligence, we did a bit of threat modeling, we have a good understanding of where the flaws might be in their systems. We're going to try to exploit those flaws. One of the ways that I like to talk about exploitation is you know there's a door there. Now we're trying to pick that lock because we know the lock is easily pickable. We're going to try to pick that lock, open the door and stick our head in, try to see what's there. This is mostly all manual work, and this is where the creative part of the pen testing comes in. You have to think outside the box. You're trying to have systems do things that they're not designed to do. So you're trying to bypass security mechanism, and sometimes you have to think outside the box. You have to be creative. You have to, try it a certain way. And if that doesn't work, you might want to try another way of doing things. So there's a lot of creativity that can come into this phase, the exploit and the post-exploit phase. Some exploit code might need to be modified. You might have to write some exploit code. That's more of an advanced pen testing thing to do. You might not have time. If you're going to start writing exploit code and you have 5 days to pen test a full environment, you might just not have time. So this is something that security researchers might do on the side and then release to the public so that I can go in. And call me a script kid if you want. Scripts are easy and fun to use up to a certain point. And proof of concept code is always popping out. Just grab it from reliable sources. Make sure that it's, review. You don't want to send something into an environment that might infect them or whatnot. Just make sure that you review those exploits that you're running against their systems. So what do we do once we've exploited a system? We've found those flaws, we've exploited the system, we're in. Why not move in? You see Buddy here in that photo, he's moving his boxes in, and that's what we're doing at this point exploit move. We've gotten access to a system, whether it's a low privileged user or It might not be a system that seems that useful to us right now, but we just want to make sure that we can stay in and that we have access to it for a little bit of time. I don't like to read from slides, but this second sentence to me is very important. So we're talking about the value of the machine. It is determined by the sensitivity of the data that's stored on it. But not only that, if you get into a system and there's no, you look around and there's nothing of use here, you don't want to back out, because this system might be your pivot into further compromising the network. You might be able, it might be a dual home machine that has an internal IP that you couldn't see from where you're sitting. So you might be able to use this machine to look further into the network or to move laterally into other systems. There might be some scripts lying around with passwords. There might be all kinds of stuff you can do with this machine. Even though the machine itself doesn't look very useful to you, doesn't mean it's not. It means that it might be used to do other things. And that brings us to our next, it's not a phase, I guess. It's more a question that we're going to go back to our vulnerability analysis. So we've looked at all the exploits, or looked at all the vulnerabilities inside of their systems, and we've exploited one of them at this point. Just for an example, we were able to do a little bit of post exploitation. Now we have two choices. Are we going to take this new machine that we have access to and run vulnerability analysis from that viewpoint in further into their network? Or do we want to step back, look at our vulnerability scans, and find another vulnerability that we might exploit? So either way, we're rinse and repeating. Do vulnerability analysis, do exploitation, do post-exploitation. We keep going round and round and round. I don't know if I'm doing any copyright infringement here with this try harder, but what you want to do is try again and try harder. Keep going until when? Well, until you run out of time, right? Because this is a paid engagement. They only have a certain budget, and you want to be able to hit everything and hit all the goals and do everything that they want you to look at. But at some point, you're just going to run out of time and run out of budget. So that's when you're going to stop. As opposed to a malicious actor who's going to stop when he gets bored or he gets what he wants. We're just going to keep going and give value to the customer for as long as we've got time. And last but not least, we need to give a report. Again, this is self-explanatory, but I like to laugh a little bit because it is a dreaded question sometimes. When can we expect the report? When I'm done a pen testing engagement and I'm done to writing the report, while writing the report can be it's fun by itself, I'm a hands-on guy. I just want to go on to the next engagement and do all the cool stuff, like not flying down tunnels of ones and zeros, but trying to exploit vulnerabilities in systems. The report is not very a technically challenging thing to do, though it is a very challenging thing to do right. Again, you can be creative here. And why is the report important? Because, again, reading from slides, the report is the tangible output of the testing process. It's the only real evidence that a test actually took place. If you've done your job right, you're leaving no trace. There's no indication that you were even ever there. Maybe a little bit in the logs, but the logs, they'll get flushed out eventually. But the report's always going to be there, and the report's going to show that the test was done, and we're going to be able to show it to all kinds of people, including auditors, including regulatory bodies that need you to be pen tested, clients. We're going to give a letter saying that this was done. And in the report, what you want to do is you need to assume that there's three types of people that's going to be digesting that report. We're going to have senior management. They want to have the executive summary, non-technical. Are we good? Are we bad? And most of the time it's bad. How bad is it? IT management, they want to look at what the system looks like and be able to budget time and budget people to be fixing those vulnerabilities. And then a really, really technical section where it shows you exactly how to reproduce the results line by line, what scripts were run, what did you see, what did you do. For the IT staff that's going to fix the holes, they can go in and really understand what's going on. So I'm right in the middle of my presentation here, and I'm basically done on the pen testing methodology. As we can see, all the steps are laid out in front of us. If we follow these steps, there is room for creativity inside of each of these, but we definitely do want to follow these steps to make sure that the product that comes out at the end is repeatable and something of value. So I'm going to thank you for this part of the presentation. You've got my LinkedIn here, Twitter. I just got a Twitter, I think a few days ago, honestly, and I'm going to start posting some content on there. Most of the content that I've posted up to now is on LinkedIn. So let's please think of questions that you might have, and we might have time at the end to do some questions. If not, we can take them to Slack, but I'd like to get to the other part of my report here. Give you a big warning here. I go from dark mode to light mode. The next slide is going to be very, very bright. So you might want to put your sunglasses on, shield your eyes, or just be careful. 1, 2, 3, here we go. Climbing. Some of you might know why I call this talk, because it's there. Because it's there has been called the 3 most famous line in mountaineering. In the 1920s, George Mallory set out to climb Mount Everest. He went 3 or 4 times, I forget. My history is not that great of climbing, but he went out to climb Mount Everest. And at a press conference, I mean, there is some question whether he actually said this or not, or if it was paraphrasing from the reporter or whatnot, but it came out in the news later on that when he was asked, why do you want to climb Mount Everest? He answered, because it's there. And I feel the same way with hacking sometimes. I know that as I was a kid, and I know a lot of people that started out in the industry by just looking around their desk and looking around, no internet, nothing, just a few games. It was there. So we just wanted to try and hack it and see what we could do with the system, see if we could push it to its limit and see if we could bypass certain things. So why climb stuff? Because it's there. Why hack stuff? Because it's there. So I thought it was a good way to call this this talk. Quick disclaimer: climbing is dangerous, and I have no credentials on the subject whatsoever. I used to have a certification for, it was called Climbing Wall Association Lead Assessor or something like that, internal. That's been a long time ago, but I just like to go out and climb. Another thing I didn't write here is that I haven't had the chance to climb as much as I've wanted to in the last, I would say, 2 years. So if ever you do run into me at a cliff somewhere or at a climbing gym and I'm barely making up the wall, it doesn't mean that I don't like climbing. It just means that I haven't had time to go out and climb. By the way, most of the photos here are photos that I've been taking on trips that I've been on. So what's on the agenda? I'm going to talk about the types of climbing. It's a little bit like information technology or cybers. The cybers, like one of my podcasters that I love says. Climbing is a little bit like IT, where you might run into somebody that says, hey, my brother's a climber. He's been up Mount Rainier out west, and you're a boulderer. You don't really have the same skill set, though a lot of people that do mountaineering will do bouldering too, but same thing as IT or cybersecurity or anything like that. You might run into somebody and they'll say, oh yeah, I know somebody who's in IT. He's a developer and you're in tech support. Well, you might not have the same skill set. So climbing is a bit like that. It's a catch-all term, and there are a bunch of different types of climbing. One thing I want to go through too is why I call climbing methodical and why I call climbing creative. Same as pen testing, there is science and there is art to climbing. One thing that I find fun about climbing is the vocabulary. Like any esoteric type sports or endeavors that you might do, there's some pretty funny vocabulary sometimes. Feel free to ask me about this on the Slack channel later on, but there's one here is probably screaming out to you. It's screaming, obviously. It's called the screen barfies. It's an actual technical term. It's a term used in ice climbing. So when you're ice climbing, you've got these ice axes. I have a show and tell here. So you have these ice axes, and you're swinging this on top of your head, right, all the time. It's cold. Your gloves are not that insulated because you want to have a good feel to your hands and everything else. So hands on top of your head, really cold. Blood drains out of your hands. You get to the top of the climb, shake out a little bit. Either you anchor up there or you get lowered down. And then all of a sudden, that warm blood goes back into your hands. Your hands are freezing, no blood into them, pins and needles. Warm blood comes rushing in. It hurts. Well, they call it the screaming barfies because you want to scream and barf at the same time. That's basically what the term is. So again, dino, dirtbag is a good term. Just feel free to reach out and we can chat about these things. So let's go through the types of climbing. The types of climbing, I've ordered these in terms of complexity and commitment. Commitment in the sense of being out in nature and being in a place where if you get hurt, it might be hard to get rescued, and in commitment in the sense of how much money it takes to get into it and how much knowledge you need. So first off, gym climbing. Gym climbing is great. It's a great way to get introduced to the sport. Safe way to do it. There's always people out there to help you. You can take courses. There's not a whole lot of objective hazards such as falling rock, uneven terrain and stuff like that. It's a great place to get started. I highly recommend anybody who's interested in climbing to at least go out to the climbing gym and take a course or just find somebody who's interested in going. Next up on our journey, we're going to talk about bouldering. Bouldering is, well, climbing a boulder, right? No ropes, no safety equipment except for the mat. Here you can see that as I'm climbing this rock, there's a mat at the bottom. So if I do fall, or when I fall, in my case, I'm not going to hit the hard ground. I'm actually going to hit this pad that's there. And yes, that thing does fold up and you put it on your back just like a backpack. And you walk up to the boulder and you go out and climb. So you don't need a whole lot of equipment. You don't need a lot of knowledge on how to set up systems, security systems. You can just go out and climb boulders. I mean, if you're interested enough, you don't even need a mat. I mean, the only problem with bouldering is every fall you hit the ground. And at my age, I don't boulder as much because hitting the ground hurts. Next up, we've got top roping. I'm going to take the laser pointer here just to show a little something. So top roping, as you can imagine, gym climbing is in the gym, bouldering is in boulders on boulders. Top roping, the rope's on top of you. So in this case, you can see that as I'm belaying my daughter here when she was younger, the rope goes all the way up to the top of the cliff and back down to her. There's an anchor up there that was set up. So you need to know how to build a bomber anchor. You need to know how to belay using a device like this, like a belay device. And you have to own a rope and everything else. But if or when she falls, the rope she's not falling, basically. She's just leaning against the rope. There might be a little bit of slack in the system and the rope will stretch. But in this sense, it's really safe because you're not falling. You're just leaning against the rope. And it's a great way to get really comfortable outdoors. You can top rope in the gym also. So this would be your next step. Next up, we've got sport climbing. I'm going to keep my laser here. I know it's annoying when it's on the screen, but sport climbing is when you're bringing the rope up with you as you climb the cliff. As you can see here, the rope is not going to the top of the cliff. My lovely wife here is actually bringing the rope up as she's going. And what she's doing is that people that have developed these cliffs, these climbing areas, they've actually drilled bolts into the rock. And as you go up, you use a quick draw to clip onto the cliff, and then you clip your rope here. So this really protects you. You could hang a semi truck on these things. So it's not a 110 pounds falling woman that's going to rip this out of the cliff, right? But the reason I call this a bit more committed is, as you can see here, where she's standing, if she were to fall, she would fall and kind of swing a little bit, right? Because this is the part that's gonna secure her. Now, if she keeps climbing here and she gets to this part and she's already not clipped into another piece of protection, the fall is going to be a lot more committing, because she's going to fall all the way down to this piece of equipment, then all the way down that same length, all the way down here, plus the stretching the rope, she might end up down here. That's a serious fall, and that is extremely scary when you're on top of your last piece of protection and you're looking at a fall, and you're looking at a 10-foot fall. A lot of things can go wrong in that type of fall, but it's still very, very safe. One thing to keep in mind here, all this equipment, the rope, the harness, the carabiners, the bolts on the rock, they're all there just to protect you. You're not using those pieces of equipment to pull yourself up the cliff. You're actually using only your hands and feet. Now we get into trad climbing. If you get into an area that has lots of cracks, there's a nice little splitter crack here, and you see all these pieces of equipment. Well, these are pieces of equipment that you put in yourself. So you're looking at a cam that actually goes into the rock, and as you pull on it, the lobes kind of push out, so they really protect you. But that's a lot more committing. You've got nuts that you're just going to slide into. Slide into the crack like this, and if you fall, it's going to hold you. But you still really need to know how to put these pieces of equipment in so that they'll hold. And that's why it's a lot more commitment on the safety side, and these things cost a lot of money, so it's going to cost you a lot of money to get into here. But at this point, if you're lead trad climbing, you've been climbing for a little while already. So as you can see, we started off in the gym, falling on mats. We had people helping you out and everything else. And now we're out in nature, probably by ourselves, putting our own pieces of gear on the rock. And it takes a lot of more mental fortitude and whatnot to be able to do this type of climbing. It's a lot of fun though. Screen barfies, look at that. I'm just gonna take my pointer off here. So ice climbing, this is the type of climbing that I refuse to bring my kids climbing, because basically you're strapping 26 knives to your body and you're crawling your way up the ice. So as we looked earlier, this ice axe pretty sharp at the end, and then you've got these things in your feet. I don't want my son to throw a tantrum and start kicking me with these things. So I'd rather not bring him ice climbing. Plus it's cold, miserable. For him, it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. So that's ice climbing. Other types of climbing, alpine climbing is out in the high mountains. It might take you a day or two to get, or maybe a full day, but it's a full committing thing. It's not parking your car, walking 5 minutes to the local cliff. This is actually going out in the high mountains and hitting a cliff wall, whether it's ice or rock or whatnot. Mixed climbing it's a mix of ice and rock. You still have those crampons and those ice tools in your hand, but you're wedging them against the rock in the rock sections and hitting them into the ice in the icing sections. Mountaineering, it's not as technical. Again, in the high mountains, you're roped up to other people because you're on a glacier. You're doing glacier travel most likely, and there are crevasses that you can fall into, hidden crevasses under the snow and the ice that you might fall into. So you're strapped to other people. And aid climbing is a very different type of climbing, where I was talking earlier about putting your pieces of equipment into the rock, but only using that equipment as protection in case that you fall. Aid climbing, you will actually put some weight on that equipment and pulling on that equipment. So instead of just using the rock and just using your hand and feet, you might be putting a piece of equipment and pulling on that piece of equipment to bring yourself up the cliff. So basically, those are the types of climbing that are out there. There are other forms and other terms and other ways to mix all of these ones up, but it should give you a good understanding of why climbing is a very wide sport, and a boulderer might not have the same skill sets as a trad climber, which might not have the same skill sets as a mountaineer. But something that's in common with all of climbing is that we're building systems to protect ourselves, or in the case of aid climbing, to actually go up the cliff. So it can get pretty complicated. One thing that I really, really like about climbing, and it's also one of the things that I like about IT, is sitting down and talking to people. After a day of climbing, we'll sit around the campfire and talk about the newest gear, the newest methods, why a knot, like a knot that we would use in a certain situation. They did some tests in the lab, and that knot is not good for that situation anymore because they've noticed that in certain situations it's going to fail. So you should use another knot. And it's a very, very technical sport in that sense. And I mean, you saw me pushing gear up. There's a lot of gear and a lot of gadgets, right? So in that sense, it's very methodical. If I get to a cliff, first thing I want to do is make sure that um, it's safe. Make sure that if I build an anchor, I build it the correct way with the correct knots, with the correct forces, and it's all physics. And so it's very methodical in that sense. But at the same time, climbing can be very creative, mostly because, well, you look at this climb here. That's a cool little climb here in Atlantic Canada. It's called Gollum's Cave. It hits all the nerd things. And this part, as you can see, I decided to climb up this. I'm going to take my pointer again here, my laser pointer. So I decided to go up here because for me, it fits. Somebody might have decided to climb this crack here. Somebody might have decided to, pop out and climb the Orat here. There's multiple ways up, and you got to pick the one that works great for you. Another thing that I've noticed is, when you're working on a problem in IT and you wake up in the middle of the night and you wake up in the middle of, sorry, I've got chats, I should have turned that off, but you wake up in the middle of the night and you all of a sudden you go like, wow, I solved the problem in my sleep. You weren't even dreaming of it. You just woke up and go like, I know the solution. I've been in situations when I was climbing, trying to solve a problem. There's a sequence of moves that I can't do. I can do all the moves leading up to it. I somehow shimmied around it or pulled on gear, and I can do all the second part of the climb, but that one move, I just can't figure it out. I've had multiple instances where I wake up in the middle of the night and I've solved it. I know exactly why. I was using these two fingers and I needed to use these two fingers instead, and my weight was completely changed and everything else. Next day I go to the gym or the climbing area, and lo and behold, I've solved the problem in my sleep. So in that sense, it's also very creative. I think we have a few minutes left. I see here I did have a few questions. Just gonna, first of all, thank you. There's my socials. Again, like I said, my Twitter's pretty bare at the moment, but I'm gonna be using it a lot more going forward. And any questions? I saw a couple come in.
Yeah, so here's what we've got for questions. Do you find OSWE type of trainings to be useful for your team now and in the future?
OSWE, definitely. Any hands-on training. Certs, like I said, is big in the consulting world, but anything from that actually gets your hands on the keyboard, tests your technical skills like OSCP, OSWE, OSCP, all of these certs that have actual real-world lab work, definitely something to look into.
All right, and from the same person, what are your thoughts on free soloing?
Free solo, I knew that was going to be a good question. Don't do it. It's extremely dangerous. If people don't know, free soloing is using just your hands and feet with no protection. There's a movie that came out called Free Solo. Alex Honnold is the world's crazy person in free solo. There is no reason, unless you want to push your own personal limits, and I cannot condone doing free soloing. I've never done it. I like my life, and something really, if a minor thing goes wrong, the consequences are really bad. So I can't in any way say that you should go out and free solo.
All right. I think that's all the questions that we've got from the chat. If anyone else has any questions, just pop them into the Slack channel.
I
She'll be
did
sticking around
see,
for a
I
little
did
bit.
see, I did see your questions around the types of fun. Do we still have a few minutes?
Yeah, we've got about 6 minutes. So take your time.
Perfect. So I saw here that a friend of mine just asked me to talk about types of fun. Hi, Jeff. Um, Types of fun. There's a climber called Kelly Cordes. He could be a comedian. He's one of the funniest person I've ever heard talk. First of all, alpine climbing to Kelly Cordes is the reason you wake up early. I'll give you the real reason why you wake up early to go alpine climbing. It's because there's a lot of hanging ice and stuff that can fall down. So you wake up really, really early. You start the climb in the middle of the night, and by the time the sun shines on the face, you should be off the face or pretty safe. Kelly Cordes says that the reason you wake up early to go alpine climbing is because by the time you wake up, you're halfway up the cliff and it's too late for you to turn around. By the time you get to your senses, it's too late and you can't turn around anymore. So that's why we take off early. Funny guy. He's got a theory on the types of fun, 3 types of fun. Type 1 fun is fun while you're doing it. It's drinking a good cup of coffee. It's drinking one of your favorite adult beverages on a sunny patio. It's fun. You wake up the next, well, maybe not wake up the next morning and it's still fun, but it's always going to be fun as you're doing it. Type 2 fun is when you go out and it's not that great. You're suffering. It's not childbirth could be considered type 2 fun because when you wake up the next day or a week later, you think back fondly on the experience. While you were having that experience, it's not great, but afterwards, when you reflect on it, it was fun. And type 3 fun is just never fun. It's breaking your hand. It's like you look back on it and go like, yeah, that sucked. But climbing and sometimes hacking is a lot of type 2 fun. While you're doing it, you're frustrated, you're hurting, you're suffering, but then you look back on it and it was worth it. So I definitely like to live in the type 2 fun place.
Awesome. So final question. Have you ever done any spelunking?
Spelunking, no, I haven't had the chance to go spelunking, though it is very interesting to me. Again, the systems are interesting. The anchors, setting up the systems, using the right nuts in the right situation, using all the equipment would be a lot of fun. I never had the chance to go spelunking. Well, I think people do it around here for some reason. It's not anything that I've ever had the chance to do.
Awesome. Well, again, if anyone else has any questions, drop them into the chat. For now, thanks for your talk. I will not attempt to butcher your name because I cannot speak a word of French despite growing up in New England.
You can call me Julien, Julien Richard. Everybody calls me Julien Richard. I've been called worse.
Well, let's stick with that then. All right. We'll see you in the chat.